I saw that system from a different point of view. I saw it from like the marketing point of view, and I immediately was thinking, oh my gosh, this could save us so much time in our marketing materials as well, systemizing our assets and making it so that creating a simple social post is so much faster and copying it out. So I was using the variables in Figma. I had our different color waves, so you could really, really quickly, like rapidly punch out these assets, especially when it's just something repetitive and business as usual. It's not necessarily something you want to be wasting your time doing. It's not overly creative work. It's more repetitive than that. Perfect. Thanks so much, Dima. I really appreciate it. And thanks to MCS for hosting us today as well. And also thank you for everybody who showed up, half of which I invited myself. So my talk today is about design systems, less repetition, more creativity. And it's a little bit more unconventional than you might be used to as well. So when I say I build design systems in Figma, you probably picture something like what you see on the screen, like product design, UI kits, components, thinking of atomic design principles, atoms, molecules, organisms. I'm actually not really here to talk about that. So if that's not what you pictured when I say I build design systems in Figma, then you're prepared for what I am about to talk about, which is transferring a lot of those principles into other areas of design that you might not normally. I think as a creative, it's really easy to think of design systems that are either thrust upon you or even ones that you build yourself as flattening your creative process. I'm hoping that through my presentation, I'll prove that that's not the case and that it actually clears the way for you to be more creative in your own pursuits. So my TLDR slide is that design systems can be used in so many ways that aren't product design. And if repetitive design tasks are eating into your creative time, a design system can likely save you a headache or two. But before I get into that, let me just give you a bit of background on me. I'm sure you've noticed already from my accent that I'm not from here. I am from Canada. I grew up on a farm, but I lived most of my life in Toronto. So 10, 12 years I lived in Toronto. And that started when I went to OCAD U, which is one of the top design schools in Canada. It's a super creative atmosphere. Most of the people going to OCAD are getting fine arts degrees. In the last 10 years, they've really pushed to give design degrees as well and be head of design in Canada as well. And it's a university, so they do a lot of theoretical practices. So you focus more on theory than on the actual practical applications of design and actually learning how to use Photoshop or any specific applications. And I loved that. I loved working in that building on top of the pencil sticks. That is where all of my classes took place, except for on Crit Day, which if anybody has had the displeasure of being in a crit day, essentially what you do is you walk into your classroom with the artwork that you've poured your heart out into for weeks, and you tape it up on the wall, and then the next 2 hours of class you essentially walk as a class around to each piece of artwork and you tear it apart. It's no surprise that most people were sick on crit day, myself included at times. So let's get into design systems. So my earliest experience with a design system, and I've purposely put it in quotation marks here, was when I was working at a design agency. My first job out of uni, it was a place called Cosmic Design. So as a design agency, we worked on loads of brands, but what I'm specifically going to talk about was our work for Live Nation Canada. I'm sure you've heard of Live Nation. They do concerts all over the world. This was the Canadian branch of it. So when I worked at Cosmic, I worked in a team and then ended up leading that team, and it was handling all of the concert materials for Live Nation. So artists like Snow Patrol, Ariana Grande, Billie Eilish, their teams send us the creative work, and then we have to build out 50, 100, sometimes 200 assets. You're talking posters, ads, sometimes they're billboards inside of the stadiums. So you're talking about so many assets And the dates, the times, and the venues are the most important pieces. And as the team leader eventually, the reviewing process of that was insane. We did make mistakes all the time. Of course we did. You're looking at 100 assets trying to detect the date, the venue, and the time. And your brain just gets super tired to it as well, because you end up thinking you're seeing the same thing over and over again. And then of course, like, one ad doesn't have the right time, and then, Snow Patrol's team comes back and is like, what are you doing? It's awful. And basically that process and that pain caused me to make what I would consider to be my first primitive design system. So at the time, this is like pre-Figma. So at the time we were using Photoshop. And essentially I created this system out of these hundreds of assets in a single Photoshop file on different artboards. And then I was using smart objects the same way you would use components in Figma. So I would put all of the date, time, venue in that smart object and then copy it across all of my artboards. And basically what this meant was when I was then reviewing these assets, if one was correct, they were all correct. So it made it so that I didn't have to search and scour all of these assets to know if everything was correct. I could just do it once. So this brings me to my next experience. So that was a long time ago. That was maybe 8 years ago. The next time I heard of a design system wasn't until maybe even 4 years ago, because most of my background is marketing design. So I worked at a company called Test Gorilla. They're based out of Amsterdam. They're a startup turned scale up. And soon after I started there, I decided to transition into UX design. It's kind of like the one piece of design that I hadn't touched yet. I had done, animation, I'd done web design, I'd done lots of stuff, but I hadn't really gone into UX. So that leap involved me agreeing to be mentored by our product design team, because they had a lot of that background knowledge. They were going to help me upskill. That is when I saw my first fully fleshed out design UI system that you probably are thinking of when you think of design systems. And it was like gorgeous. And because of the events that led up to that moment, the transition, the mentorship, and then also we were going through a rebrand, I saw that system from a different point of view. I saw it from like the marketing point of view, and I immediately was thinking, oh my gosh, this could save us so much time in our marketing materials as well, systemizing our assets and making it so that creating a simple social post is so much faster, and copying it out and changing the words and changing the icons and stuff. So while I was working there, while I was transitioning, the timing kind of lined up well. I got into December, which obviously work slows down in December. Everybody's about to go off for Christmas. And I created the entire design system for our marketing department. So this is a little bit small. Hopefully you can kind of see some of the details. This essentially just outlines how it was working. So I was using the variables in Figma. I had our different color waves. So you could really, really quickly, like rapidly punch out these assets, especially when it's just something repetitive and business as usual. It's not necessarily something you want to be wasting your time doing. It's not overly creative work. It's more repetitive than that. And then nobody used it except for me and my team. So I delivered it and then nobody wanted to use it. And the pushback really is similar to the messages that I threw up on screen there. Looking back retrospectively, it made sense. And I'll get into that in a second. But yeah, it took 3 good months just to get anybody to want to use it. And then it took probably another 3 months to get them to start using it the way I had imagined they would use it to make their life more efficient. So the lessons I learned from that experience were that, essentially it's keeping a system up to date requires buy-in. You can't actually just do it if you're the only person pushing for it. It doesn't make any sense. So you really do have to build with your team, not for your team. You have to include people in the process, otherwise they are going to push back, and it's super understandable, especially if you are short on time, like most of us are, pumping out tons of assets. you're going to be resistant because you're worried. You're worried that it's not actually going to save time. I'm going to spend more time learning this. I could have just made the asset already. And yeah, it might seem like spending that time getting feedback is a waste of time, but it actually saves you headaches in the long term. It definitely would have saved me headaches at that point. And the image I have on screen as well is just kind of an example of how you can do that. Now when I build systems with other designers, I do try and say, hey, can you actually design this whole section of the system? And then can you like present it to the rest of the team and tell us how you want us to use it? Because essentially immediately you've gained yourself an advocate because they obviously want their work to be used as well. Essentially, like in summation, just you have to be diplomatic about the details. So that pulls me into my current role where I'm building out another design system, which is at Comply First. So we're based out of Hillsborough. We're a startup which has its own troubles that I'm about to get into as well. Basically, the learnings that I had turned into opportunity, and then that opportunity has like helped me with my natural progression as well, because I had the experience of building a design system from scratch. I had the experience of doing all different types of design, including UX at this point. And yeah, startups like need systems. They are so time poor that if you don't have a system, you just can't make as much. It really like limits your scalability, specifically with design assets I'm talking about. Really, it's everywhere, but yeah, design assets is what I'm thinking of. So before I get into the actual system and then my approach to building that system as well, I just want to brag a bit about the mess I walked into. So as the first creative hire, because that's what I was, there had been no designers working there previously. I mean, you can probably imagine it. Like, it was like a patchwork of these freelancer files where there was a million layers. Not a single one of them was named. It was like frame 52417. You know, assets were scattered across Figma, but then also Canva, and also just like random one-off JPEGs and OneDrive folders. They did have PDF brand guidelines, but they might as well have not existed because they weren't being adhered to in any way. And the product design file, while you're looking at it, it was just one big file with all of our artboards in it, and none of them actually reflected what the product really looked like. It was like ideas that then got changed, but then the designs never came back through. And we didn't even have a website. It was like 2 hard-coded pages by our product devs. So what I'm trying to get at is, like, when you walk into a mess like that, I think the first thing you think as a designer is like, okay, there's nothing here, so what do you tackle first? Like, how do you decide what I'm going to tackle? I could tackle the marketing side, I could tackle the product side, I could tackle the brand side. And this is kind of a matrix that I run through in my head. I don't actually stare at this when I'm deciding what to work on, but this is kind of in the back of my head. I basically weigh up, like, how long it's eating into my time per week, how repetitive the task is, so basically how repeatable is it, how creative is it or should it be, and then how valuable is it to the business, because it's much easier to ask for time for things if you can kind of like prove a bit of value as well. And I've kind of turned it into a bit of a heat map, whereas like the darker the square is, the faster I'm going to turn it and systemize it. So here, let me see if I can do something kind of funky here. So if you like think of a project and you kind of try and draw it out. So let's say it's like low value, requires some creative input, somewhat repetitive, and then takes between 30 minutes to an hour a week. You can kind of say like, oh, that's actually, you know, like all together, that's a pretty like shaded area. I should probably systemize it. Whereas if it's like super valuable, see, I actually consider highly valuable as like don't systemize it, because you probably should be a bit more creative and be using your creative juices a little more to think of something like very interesting. And it's like a once-off. It's like, well, I'm not going to systemize that. I'm never going to use it again. I was going to clear that off of the page, but I'm just not going to. So once you've kind of thought over those things, then it gets into kind of like, this is how I approached the creative process of making this design. And this is very much so from the lens of one designer. So we're thinking like marketing, product, and brand. So the first thing I did is I took the lesson of build with, not for, even though I wasn't in a team of designers, I took that like as like top, and I sat down with the founders and I was asking them like, why don't you use your current brand guidelines? What aren't they giving you? What are you looking for? And then we did a bit of a refresh. They didn't have illustrations, so we started building out like, what should the illustrations look like? What feelings are we trying to convey? And then I started obviously documenting all of the brand elements that we could document into the system. Started doing website components. There's like a whole question of like, do you have one big system or do you have like a few small ones that feed into each other? I went for the latter of a few small ones that feed into each other. That's really getting into the weeds of it though. Basically what I would say my takeaway as I've been doing this is a small system is better than no system, absolutely, hands down. If you can systemize something to make it more repeatable, it's worth the time expenditure because you're going to save yourself that time. And the knock-on effect of that has been really helpful to me as, again, the only creative. If I didn't have systems in place, if I wasn't building these systems, I would still be just as flat out as I was on day one. So I'm coming up on my year here at Comply First. And as the system becomes more complete, every asset I create is easier to create. Finding old assets is easier because I have everything kind of like properly filed. We're building out like these website pages. I'm making them, on the very first slide, I had these little icons of Lego. I try to always think of design systems as that like atomic principle, Lego cubes. So my marketers can actually design in Figma now because it's all just Lego blocks. They just kind of like stick them together. It's great. It saves me a lot of time. Basically, that is what I'm getting at. Like, I used to feel like I was sprinting in every direction and not kind of knowing what I was doing. And now I have time to do what I'm sure all of us have wanted to do at one point or another when you're staring in the face of a huge mess. And this is definitely what I feel like I want to do a lot of the times. But I can't speak too loudly because I have HR in the room with me. But no, I think another thing that people tend to lean towards when they gain back time and they're thinking of like, how do I use that time? How do I like use this to be creative and make these like amazing big campaigns that you see, you know, Nike doing or Google or something. But actually, I have found that the creative thing that I spend most of my time doing now is going back and looking at the designs I did make a year ago for my current company and just marking them up and questioning my own decisions. That's really like how I'm trying to grow. I basically go through like specific assets that I've made previously, question like what the visuals are, what they're making me feel, what they're supposed to be making me feel, interrogating myself essentially. And then I will like compare those notes with my coworkers as well, ask them what they think. How does this make you feel? You kind of get the idea. Basically, what I'm saying is that being creative isn't always brainstorming for this like big campaign that might come about. Sometimes it is just like this like self-reflection, slow growth, always getting a little bit better, pushing your own boundaries instead of trying to push like the boundaries of the world. So essentially, I've brought myself back to Crit Day, which I spent so much time avoiding. It's basically the work that I say, it's like the most important work that you'll find any excuse to avoid because it is like so deeply uncomfortable. A lot of times I look back at my old work and I cringe a little bit, or I'm like, oh gosh, that was like not my best work, not my best move. But it is definitely how I have learned to like grow in my role. And basically like what I'm trying to get at is that design systems can help you do that, even if you're using them in ways that other people might not, like using them for marketing design, using them for assets, systemizing things that other people might not. And thank you very much. That's everything I have to say.